enough of hate, enough of divisions, enough of war and violence in God's name. We have caused too many tears. The time has come for us to stand together. Let us stand together. At the beginning of the Bible, we are told how God created every human being in his image according to his likeness. Now we know that no two human beings are alike. So what the Bible is telling us is that even somebody who is not in my image, whose language, whose culture, whose creed, whose traditions are different from mine, is nonetheless in God's image. The Bible is challenging me to see a trace of God in the face of a stranger. And that is how religion should lead us, to extend our imaginative embrace and our hand of friendship across the boundaries between faiths. God is so much bigger than any of us in our particular tradition can comprehend. It is by coming to see that trace of God in the face of a stranger that faith allows us to come together across all the barriers that otherwise divide us. Coming to know leaders of other faiths, Christian, Muslim, Sikh, Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, Zoroastrian, Baha'i, and so many others, you begin to realize the number of different ways people have a sense of the same things that inspire us. The sense of the holy, the sublime, the sanctity of life, what makes each individual precious, the idea of hospitality, the idea of working for the welfare of others. All of these things we do, but we do in such different ways. So the more I encounter people of other faiths, the more ways I realize that we can be true to something within us that is bigger than all of us. And that is the way different faiths give us so much wider perspective on the way God works through the human spirit. In Judaism, we have a wonderful idea. It's called arguments for the sake of heaven. Because Judaism is all about arguments. Abraham, Moses, Jeremiah, Job all argue with God. In the writings of our sages, it's always Rabbi X says this and Rabbi Y says that. This is a wonderful idea, arguments for the sake of heaven. This means that we hear many different views, many different opinions. And when we do this, our grasp of the truth expands as we realize how many individual strands there are in the tapestry of faith, how many different languages there are in which human beings come together to pray to and give their thanks to God. When we realize the complex harmonies of the divine choral symphony, as we as humanity sing our praises to our Creator. It is that diversity that means that our vision of God becomes ever wider the more differences it embraces. One of the wonderful things about spending time with people completely unlike you is you discover how much you have in common. The same fears, the same hopes, the same concerns. What kind of world are we building for our grandchildren not yet born? What are the prospects for peace? How are we going to negotiate the turbulences that lie ahead? And suddenly we discover that our shared humanity transcends our religious and cultural differences, and something magic happens, a little epiphany, as soul speaks to soul across all the barriers that divide us. Religions and cultures are very often very different, but there is a universal strand that you find in virtually every culture, linking it to virtually every other, and that is the strand called wisdom. Because wisdom doesn't so much depend on revelation, it depends on the combined reflective experience of humankind, as it has faced the same kind of difficulties. We find the wisdom literature of the ancient Near East. We find the wisdom literature of the great Hellenistic civilizations, the Oriental mysticisms, the wisdom traditions of China, and so on. Very, very similar indeed to the wisdom traditions of Judaism. Wisdom is the universal language of humankind, and it is through those wisdom elements in our different faiths that we find we have the most in common. One of the beautiful things about prayer is it lifts and broadens our horizons. Very often at a soccer match, I pray that my team beat the opposition, but then deep down I know that God is on the side of the game, not the side of the team. So he is on the side of humanity as a whole, not my little bit when it's fighting your little bit. So when we truly, but truly pray, our prayers have to be broad enough to include all of humankind and all that divides and separates us, all that causes us to hate one another or fight one another, God forbid. When we pray to the author of all, the parent of all, the source of all life. And that is why the deepest prayer is for the common human good. There are two fundamentally different ways in which we can construct relationships between the faiths. One I call face-to-face, the other I call side-by-side. Face-to-face is interfaith dialogue. I tell you about my faith, you tell me about yours, and out of that, mutual understanding emerges. But it tends to be quite elevated in rarefied settings among very, very distinguished leaders of the respective faiths. Side-by-side is something much more street level. It means that if there's a problem that confronts us all in a neighborhood, there's graffiti, there's street crime, there are drug dealers, well, that is going to affect the members of that neighborhood, be they Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, or whatever. And when we stand side by side to address those problems, friendships emerge naturally, without any theological dialogue, simply by the fact that we've been there helping one another solve a problem that none of us can solve alone. That is why working together to address common problems is so productive. It creates friendships, and friendships that last, and out of those friendships comes new harmony between the faiths.